E te iwi tēnā koutou, kia ora katoa tātou I roto I tēnei pō. Kia ora everybody, Che Wilson here from Te Pai Waho, connecting to you tonight from a number of different platforms. And it's the continuation of identity and specifically talking about tonight, talking about Pepeha and where to next with Pepeha. But firstly, koutou e āpai ake ana I Mauru Māori, tēnā koutou. I tauri atu te marama, well, I mate, ara ko whiro tērā I te wikene, me te mātou tonu ko te 1st of September, hei a popo, is it? Or the next day? Yeah, so mihi ana kia koutou, everybody that's doing Mahuru Māori, and big mihi to you all. Mindful that whiro started in the weekend, so that for those who are following the maramataka, you would have started in the weekend and the rest will be starting tomorrow. So kika ara koutou, keep it up. It's an awesome kaupapa. E tangi ana ki ngā mate, Auntie Gina, e moe, ko koe tērā I wakaoki atu ki te iwi nui tērā wiki, ko koe ko koutou ki te pō, ko tātou tēnei ko ngā mauetanga I oe mi nei a tangi nei, kia ora katoa tātou. Kia ora Penny. So, what I thought I'd do is talk a bit more about Pepeha, and I've done sessions about Pepeha already, so I'm not going to go into that. But just as we go over this kaupapa around identity, I want to ask some questions around Pepeha and pose some questions for you to think about. But just want to acknowledge the previous kaupapa on identity, and there was a bit of a following around trauma, and both the marae trauma and the reo trauma, which is why I did the session last week on healing, which I don't think actually had much to do with identity, but just wanted to balance it up because got a massive amount of feedback. So Pepeha, as we know today, Pepeha is one of these key components to the Māori interpretation, the modern Māori interpretation of identity. And I only say that because traditionally the Pepeha might have been done by the kai kōrero or your chief or kaumatu, rather than by everybody. And that's then evolved over the last 50 years to everybody saying it. And I remember clearly sitting at our kitchen table talking to my grandfather, my dad's dad, about my pepeha when I was at primary school. And I did my pepeha and he goes, "That's not your pepeha." And because I'd done it for my mother's side. And he corrected me and he said, no, if you're going to say that and that, you need to be saying this instead. And yeah, it was a really good lesson. But what I want to talk about is Te Ao Māori has evolved and we still frame ourselves with our iwi, and that is our whakapapa. And Pepeha for non-Māori has evolved. At one stage, people were teaching them to just say their mountain, etc., or even some have taught them to say the local mountain where they're from. The latest iteration is getting them to do their own ancestral stuff and then do a reference to where they live. The question for me is, there are many of us who, though still are very strongly connected to our iwi, in reality, most of our practices are with our hapori. And your hapori might be, your community might be a language community like for kura kaupapa, kohanga reo, whare kura. It might be a kapahaka community. It might be something else. And so how do we start to include those references to those communities, especially if you've been part of them for some generations now? And how do we extend this idea of pepeha? Number one question. Number two question is, how do we extend it if you've been living... Oh, hey, bro. Hey, Chris. How do we extend this idea of pepeha to all our cousins who have lived at least 1, 2, sometimes 3 generations now abroad? Because the Maori diaspora, and so that diaspora is where you spread all around the world, and the Maori diaspora is quite big. There's probably almost 500,000 people, 500,000 people in Australia of Maori descent. When I was living in London in 2000s, early 2000s, there would have been about 15,000 New Zealanders and a good little percentage of Maori in that, plus everyone else everywhere around the world. Almost every country I've been into, I've banged into a Maori. And so it's broad. What's the pepeha for them? And yes, don't get me wrong, we should all be connecting back to our tribal identity. But how does pepeha extend? Because if you look at what's that Greek wedding movie? Big Fat Greek Wedding. All those kids get sent to Greek school. So what's our version? And how do we ascertain what a pepeha is for Ngāti Rānana, which is a group that's been in existence for 60 years. Yeah, it must be 60 soon. Whangakakara, which is the Hong Kong Māori group. Ngāti Koraha, which is the Dubai Māori group. We'll have a group in Utah, no doubt. And we've got our different whānau in Poi Hākena, Poi Piripi, Te Urupu, etc., all in Australia. And I'm not saying that we have to be claiming the maunga and the awa, because that's not our place to. But how do we extend pepeha in a way that works for hapori, for communities of interest, as well as for people that live abroad? And I'm posing these questions because we've got to continually work out how do we evolve. And I'm not talking about legal rights, because that's a whole different argument, but really about our identity, so that identity can survive in a world where we're encouraged to be Western. And I know I'm very Western, and I know a lot of Māori that I talk to far out. Nice stats there, thank you, Matt. I know that a lot of Māori that I talk to who are active in Te Ao Māori don't like it when I say that I'm Western, because I'm implying that we're all Western. And yes, I am implying that. But it's about how do we navigate these spaces to ensure that we can use really strong building blocks like pepeha to enhance our identity wherever we might be, remembering that the key building block of Māori identity is the simple phrase, e kore au e ngaro e kākanu I ruia mai rangi Aotea. And that's a centuries old. So, that centuries old saying says that we will never be lost because we are of rangi. And what that's talking about is that, so how do we enhance that identity so that you feel connected, and it makes sense in your expression of no reira, to the MMIL team that are graduating Ngā Pōpō. See you tomorrow night. I'm in Wellington, so I won't get to the grad until the afternoon, but we'll be at Eke Tangaroa on Thursday. E me I kaua tu ana ki koutou. And yes, I can see my cousin all the way in Turupu in Western Australia. Love to mum, cuz. Tēnā koutou, rire rire au. Pai marire.